So welcome to FitMitTuro Fitness Podcast, and today's guest is Rob Hanaghan, and you might know and find him from social media under Bobbynutrition. So we are talking about emotional eating, and as that is something what Rob is specialized, different kind of strategies, how to, first of all, to get to know if you are struggling with emotional eating, as so many people are struggling with it without even knowing about it, and then we go through all kind of strategies how to become aware and how to get rid of that emotional eating. So first of all, welcome to show, Rob, and just tell a little bit about you, who you are, where you live, and what you are doing.
Cool. Yes, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. Very, very happy to be here. So a bit about, I'll talk about what the business Bobbynutrition does and how we help people first, and then I can talk a bit about how it all started, a bit about myself and my past, because that very much drives everything that we do as a business. Mm-hmm. So the way the business has found itself is helping women. There are a few men in our program. We don't explicitly exclude men, but it just so happens to be how I talk and the message that I convey attracts the female audience as opposed to the male. So we don't exclude men, but yeah, primarily we work with women. And what we focus on is ladies who have identified that their eating habits, let's call them negative eating habits for the sake of conversation, they've started to realize that they followed this diet, they followed that diet, they followed this diet XYZ, every single, even weight loss surgery. So every avenue they have tried just hasn't worked. And then the natural conclusion from that is, well, everybody else can do it, but I can't. So then the inherent conclusion is, well, I'm the problem. And that's what all of these women think. And what we help them realize is that the way that they use food is actually a coping mechanism. It's to manage the difficulties of life. And the difficulties of life, you know, somebody can have circumstance A occur to them, and then the other person can have exactly the same circumstance happen to them, but those two different people experienced those two same circumstances completely differently. And the reason that they experience them differently, the reason that one might feel more stressed than the other, is because one has a completely different past to the other person. So then what we have to help people realize, and what we help our clients realize, is that they're containing trauma, which everyone has, by the way. I think people have this misconception as well that trauma is only obvious trauma. And it's not. Everybody's got trauma, just to a higher or lesser extent. So they're containing this trauma that they either were not aware of, or if they were aware of it, they didn't have the tools to emotionally regulate themselves outside of what food can provide them. So food is just this way for these ladies to relax their nervous system, to feel, to relieve the stress. But of course, too much of anything is dangerous, you know? So anyway, we'll go into all of that, but we help that demographic of lady, let's say. And how this came to be was that Bobbynutrition wasn't always that, actually. Bobbynutrition was very much focused on, I've always been obsessed with evidence-based nutrition. I know of myself now, being an extremely aware human, that the reason that I got into science-based, let's say, myth busting, we all love to myth bust and call people out on wrong information and things like that. I realize now that when I was doing that, it's because I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder. I'd struggled my entire life through school, and finally I had found something that I was good at least intellectually good at anyway. And it served as a bit of an ego boost for me. So I went into the evidence-based fitness space, And it was cool. Like, I was good at what I did. I helped people with, you know, calories, macros, all that type of stuff. And I helped educate people on the fundamentals of nutrition as opposed to just giving them calories, for example. The principle then being that, well, if you know how, because I've told you how, you can go away and you'll never need a coach ever again. That was the premise behind it. But that got boring for me really quickly. It just didn't get my own motor running. And it started to show just in the content that I would record, in, you know, just waking up every day. I didn't have that desire for it that I do for what I do at the moment. And at this point, just prior to all of that, I'd been recovering from alcoholism. We can talk about that later as well in more detail, but to keep it short and sweet, at this point, yeah, I was, the reason I was jumping into all of this, because I wanted to do something for me. I wanted to pursue a purpose rather than just keep working in the corporate world, doing a 9 to 5, which was not feeding the soul, let's say. And once I then started talking about that, what brought me out of alcoholism was quite different to what most alcoholics use. So most alcoholics go to AA.
Yeah.
And I tried AA many times, and I would relapse and relapse and relapse and relapse, and I couldn't figure out why. And like the women that I help now, the only conclusion is that I'm the problem. That's the only conclusion that naturally came to me. You know, and then what do you do when you feel that level of shame? You use the very thing to comfort the shame that you're trying to avoid. So the cycle goes round. And then I just so happened to stumble across a guy called Mark Manson. I'm not sure if you've read any of Mark Manson's books. But,
I have.
It's really popular now. But at the time, these books weren't popular. And self-development wasn't what it is now. Like, everybody's into self-development these days. But at that point, it wasn't really a thing. And at least in the UK, anyway, we're very cynical here in the UK. And I was coming out of a long-term relationship at the time. So my parents said to me, let's just take you away. We're going to, me and your dad, my mum, me and your dad are going to go on holiday anyway. Why don't you come with us, you know, to the place that we always took you when you were young, just to distract you, take you away from things. Cool, I'll do that. And I've got the book here. No, but I saw the book. It's a bright orange book, really stands out. And I was in the airport and I saw this book on the shelf, and I was like, because I've always hated reading. At least, you know, I've never been a fiction fan. And I certainly, being a very cynical human in the past, I wasn't into self-development and what have you, because to me, it wasn't logical. We can come to that later as well, in my perspective on it, because I see it as a very logical process now. But right then I had a very negative bias towards it, which is completely unsubstantiated. And I was like, but you know what? What have I got to lose? So I picked the book up off the shelf, and you couldn't tear me away from it the entire holiday. And that book is very much focused on values and helping you look in to your subconscious and the emotional section of your brain, which contains your values. So you don't really choose your values. They're intrinsic within you. They're what you've been exposed to, and therefore what you deem as important to the world. And it's also, therefore, how you measure success and failure in life, what you think is good and what you think is bad. And once Mark in the book started essentially calling me out and saying things like, you know, talking about how you value other people's opinions too much, I didn't even realize that was a thing. I just thought you were supposed to value people's opinions because that's how I'd been brought up. It had never been challenged before. Again, everyone talks about it these days, but back then it wasn't spoken about. You just kind of cracked on with it. What people thought was important. And once I was challenged with that, it completely flipped how I think about everything. It made me realize that it was not to relinquish responsibility from myself, but it helped me realize that, well, maybe the reason I think the way I think is because of, you know, certain things of my past.
Yeah.
And you know, being a kid at that point when all of this stuff happened, maybe I just didn't have the emotional tools as a child to manage all of this. And then it keeps happening again and again and again and again, and all of this life happens. You don't have the tools to manage it, and then you go into adulthood and you take all of that stuff with you into adulthood.
Yeah.
And if you're not given the responsible emotional regulation tools into adulthood, if you're not taught how to manage the big bad world, you have to cope somehow.
Yeah.
And alcohol was my release, and it's the thing that worked for me. And it's a slow burner. You know, you don't just wake up one day and become an alcoholic. It happens slowly over time, and then before you know it, it's a bit too late. So once I started talking about how I overcame alcoholism through that route, as opposed to the AA route, which is avoid all your friends who drink, avoid the alcohol aisles, avoid. Yeah. Sure, in the short term, that's sound advice. But in the long term, you're going to be exposed to something like alcohol at some point. You can't avoid it your entire life. And if you're avoiding something, like you'll know with food, what happens in somebody's mind when you tell someone to avoid chocolate? It's the only bloody thing to think about. It's the same with alcohol. So once I approached it from more of an acceptance perspective as opposed to an avoidance perspective, it's I haven't drank a drop since, and there's no. I'm not saying that I'm not going to be really arrogant and cocky and say it will never happen. I genuinely don't think it ever will. But there's no temptations, nothing, and that perspective, a very logical, neurological, understanding the brain, understanding the human mind, understanding the psyche. Once you're able to connect dots to past trauma, it then helped me realize that, well, the way I used alcohol is exactly the same way these ladies use food, because I was talking about it more, because it was passionate, you know. So once all that stuff got boring, once all the general nutrition stuff got boring for me, and I started talking about the mind more, my actual passion, this woman started approaching me, this very specific type of lady with this very specific type of problem. And before I knew it, I was like, oh, we've got something here. We can really help, like genuinely help people. And that's how it all happened. It was kind of an accident.
But this is the way, like, we know each other's, like, for I don't know what, when we met in social media, like years ago, like when we both started like 5-6 years ago. And this is what I love seeing you, like how much you changed your content, everything. You started to talk more about your own stuff, and going from just being a calorie deficit and do this and changing totally your approach. And that is what I love. And this is something like what I also like. I think it's something what you, when you coach and work with a lot of people, you start to recognize some patterns, what people are struggling. And then when you are good at solving those patterns and those really low, like those underlying issues, that's when you are in something greater and bigger. Because it's simple to say, like, I think my journey as a coach, like in the beginning, it was like probably like same than for you, telling people that this is amount of calories you eat, this amount of protein, and if you can't do it, it's your problem. I told you what to do, but you just didn't do it. And now it's all about like that. Okay, if that is not working, I'm the problem. That's my responsibility to provide you strategies that are fitting into your lifestyle. And if there is something like it's usually, like you said, it's a little bit deeper, and understanding and learning why you are actually doing and what if you are, because it's not like what most people think, that they think that they just need to lose that, let's say 20 pounds or 20 kilos or whatever amount of weight, and they are happy. But then if I tell them that, okay, I can get you, if I would get you for tomorrow losing that weight, would you be, but you would have all these underlying issues what are causing that you are eating, still keep eating for emotions, you are not feeling great, you are not happy with yourself, would you be happier? And or if I could fix first those underlying issues and then they are all leading that you will also at some point have that you end up losing that fat, you end up losing weight, what you wanted, but it's always that starting first, these underlying issues. And these are like, I was just obviously, like, it's probably for you too also, like we are coaches, and I love to pay attention about people, what they are doing. And I was just in Mongolia with a group of guys, and it was a good example of this, what you just said came to my mind. I thought to share it. Like, there's one guy, like he was taking a lot of food on his plate, and because they said that now we are closing lunch buffet, and it's a kind of like last order, and you could, if it's the same thing with the alcohol, there's a last order, go everyone to get goes. What you want, and then it's like that, all right, it's the last one, so I'm going to go probably a lot more than you actually need. And that was the case with that guy. And then he was like, I saw that he was eating so slowly, and he couldn't finish it, and there was a piece of bread, and then he asked me that, do I want to get that piece of bread? And I said that no, I had enough. And then I asked him that, were you as a child, did your parents were you growing up that you had to finish everything on your plate? Because that's what I'm coming from, and I struggle in the past exactly the same thing, that I can't leave anything behind. And then he was like that, oh yeah, that's how I grew up. I said, and then I'm a coach. I'm not going to tell you that what you should be doing, but just think to who you are going to give. Are you doing some good for someone that you finish that piece of bread, what you can't literally eat anymore? Or are you going to, if you are leaving it behind, anyways, they are throwing that food away. So it's not, if you are not a waste can. So just leave it if you are full. It's not, you are not doing anyone service. But these are just kind of real life examples when you start to see those patterns, why everything is what is happening, where it is coming from. And this was, for me, was a big realization to understand that how things like what I was telling this exactly the same thing, example for my mom. And because she's always like that, now eat when you are at home, why you are not finishing everything. And then I said that this is something like, I'm now 41 years old. I know that you didn't mean anything bad when you did it, but I still struggle 25, 30 years later on the same problem, feeling guilty, leaving something behind. And she was like that, wow, she never thought that what kind of, like, obviously she's the best mom ever, and for sure did the best possible things she could, and she knew with her knowledge. But these kind of small things, how long they are part of our journey, our life. And this is, I think it's the same thing what you realized yourself and how you help people.
Yeah, I think that final point, I've got a few points on a number of things that you've raised there, which have sparked some ideas, but just on that final one, we always have to make it absolutely clear that this is not a blaming exercise. This is not a case of saying this was mum and dad's fault, so therefore I can just point the finger at my entire life. No, that's a victim mentality. That's the opposite of what we want.
Yeah.
This is about helping people have a bit of closure on why they are the way they are and why they think the way they think. It's not to maliciously hold people accountable. Don't get me wrong, like we work with ladies whose parents, I'll try and be relatively passive about it, weren't particularly nice people, and certainly weren't nice to their children. So yes, in some examples, there are cases where you might have to put a boundary in place with the parent. But if it's like the case of your mother, for example, I'll always say people do the best they can with the tools that they have. So depending on generationally, culturally, people, and this is now moving away from the realms of food. Let's look at education, for example. If you've got a mum and dad who have come from some background of a war-torn country, and they have fled that country, and in that fleeing, they fled to a country where security can be found in a good job. you can be damn sure that their frame of mind, their perspective towards how important it is to have a secure job is much more than a logical perspective. It's emotionally driven because their nervous system has been so well, to use the same term, torn apart, like the country that they came from, that the very idea of doing anything that isn't safe, such as not having a safe job, it takes them back to the trauma that they tried to leave. So this is why we see them instilling this mentality in their children that education is absolutely everything. Don't get me wrong, it is important, but you have to be a doctor, you have to be this, you have to do that, you have to do that, and then it's almost as though the child has no choice. But it's because the parents is honestly, their intention is pure and good, and they just want the best for their children. But what they don't realize is that it might not be. Their intentions are good, but it might not be what's actually best for them. But we can't put too much accountability on these parents, because one, every bloody person's talking of, everyone's a bloody psychologist these days. You know what I mean? Everyone, you see TikTok everywhere and what have you. You know, if we go back further back than the year 2000, people weren't talking about what we're talking about now. Never mind going back to the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Oh yeah, no, there was no talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it's borderline common sense to just make sure your child is well fed. It you know, it means that you care. It means that you love them. And there are many cases where it will break a parent's heart to find out that they've actually damaged their children. But the solace that I can offer to that, it's not really much solace, but if it is any, is that every parent is going to screw up their kid in some way or another. It's unavoidable. You know?
No, we are all doing mistakes, and it's just how to accept it, that it's you are doing everything. Like it was the best example. Like I love to have this kind of like deeper discussions, and I talk with my mom like that. I told her like that, I'm not blaming you about anything. It's just that now, as a being coach and learning these patterns and looking what I'm doing myself and where they are coming from, and then she started to think that, oh, this is actually something what was coming from her mom, was passing generation. And of course, obviously, her mom, there was at the time was hard times back in Finland. You know, there was a wartime. There was not a lot of food. You know, they had to fight for get bread. There was limits of foods. That it's not like that now. Food is everywhere available. At the time, it was very limited. And it was just the mentality to not waste any food. You didn't have a lot of income, a lot of money, and overall not a lot of food. So obviously that behavior was my grandma passing to my mom, and then my mom did the best she could and passing to me. And these are it's not to blame anyone, but it's just the understanding that where these things are coming from. And then when you get that realization that, okay, this is what and those are really hard to recognize, that you are actually struggling with these kind of emotional things. But when you starting to understand that, wow, this is actually coming from there, and that's why I'm using this as a coping mechanism to get rid of maybe some other issues.
And there's often an irony in all of this as well. So I think maybe I'm going to try to speak directly to some of your listeners, because what's extremely prevalent in the minds and psychologies of the ladies who we work with is that they've been brought up in a household that is very much, let's say, they were shamed somewhat for expressing some sort of emotion. You know, again, people weren't informed back then. So if you were sad, if you were angry, God forbid, you know, you were put in the corner of the room until you calmed down. This was a very, very standard punishment if we're going back to the 80s and 90s, probably, and certainly prior to that. Whereas what we understand now is that a child it will teach the child not to do it again, absolutely. What it also teaches the child is that the reason not to do it leaves a sense of shame in them consistently. And this shame then stays with them for the rest of their lives, not for a few years. It stays with people. Trauma stays with an individual for the rest of their life. And when you are shamed for expressing some form of emotion, the adult translation for that when the child grows into adulthood is, well, I can't complain about anything. I can't hold mum and dad accountable, because that would defy everything that I have been taught, which is that I can't express how I feel. So then these ladies will just keep on perpetuating and this mentality and holding in what they're actually feeling. So then what that's doing is, instead of them then reaching out for help, it completely stops them in their tracks. Because if you're going to ask for help, it means that you're expressing emotion, which is exactly what you were shamed into not doing, you know? So it's worth me saying to any of your listeners that if that resonates, chances are you need to reach out to somebody for a bit of help, because what's actually holding you back isn't as logical as you once thought it was.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. This is something what needs to be addressed at some way. So what about then for someone who, how to get recognized that you might have an idea that you are struggling with emotional eating, or that kind of patterns that you are, what is the first step, first of all, to get recognized that you might actually use food as a coping mechanism for some issues what we talked?
You mean, how can people recognize it?
What is the first step when you, let's say that somebody is saying that I'm eating for emotions, like either being sad, angry, happy, stressed, whatever emotions we have.
For me, this is where people will differ, including me and my team, for example. So everyone will have a different approach to this. What I believe is best is helping people understand why it's there in the first place. I think if somebody, for example, for me, if you were not to help somebody understand where all of this is coming from, and then you were to go straight to putting action in place, such as, let's practice eating a bit more mindfully. Well, what's inevitably going to happen is the stress will still be there from a shitty job that they don't enjoy, right? So that's still going to be there. So then maybe on one or more occasions, that mindful eating isn't quite there. They've just had a bad day and it's very early on in their journey. Well, if you haven't helped them manage or understand where the guilt or their shame is coming from, what's going to happen the second that they mess things up? I'm air quoting if people are listening. If you mess things up by having a few too many bars of chocolate, you're going to feel the same shame and guilt because you haven't even addressed it to begin with. So for me, the instructions are extremely important, but they're only as applicable as what the individual has enough self-awareness of to begin with. So it's about, for me, first of all, developing a sense of self-awareness to what's actually happening. How the bloody hell am I actually feeling? Most people who we speak to don't even acknowledge their feelings because they've been shamed for them their entire lives. So they get on with life, they push through, they be there for everybody, they manage everybody else's emotions, they leave their own behind. And then before you know it, it's gotten to the end of the day. They've accepted everybody meeting invite from work. They've ran after the kids to try and get their packed lunches ready in the morning. They might have done the same for their husbands. And it's 6 p.m. and they're drained. They're drained because they're not just drained from the day itself. They're drained from the years of trauma that is actually driving why that day feels so stressful, if that makes sense. Coming back to how I
Absolutely.
started it, one person can experience exactly the same thing as another person, but you interpret it entirely differently because of the years of everything that's been happening to you prior that you haven't addressed yet. So, you know, these guys can wake up and by 9 a.m., your nervous system is already completely out of whack. So what chance do you stand by the time it gets to 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. when you've had to actually experience the day? You know, so the first thing is actually acknowledging and accepting the feelings that are actually coming, because we suppress them normally. We suppress them with food, we suppress them with people pleasing. One thing that I always have to make clear to people is that we're not a weight loss program. We help people lose weight, but the weight loss is just a byproduct of you using food to cope with all of that other stuff. Food is just one coping mechanism. There are many coping mechanisms. There is people pleasing. There's just trying to be enough at work. There's perfectionism. So it's about addressing and developing awareness to all of these areas of life that you, I would say, just try a bit too hard for. You're pushing really hard to get the promotion. You're pushing really hard to be the perfect wife or the perfect husband. You're pushing really hard to be the perfect mother. You're always pushing, reaching. And it's okay to have goals, for God's sake. Of course it is. And it's okay to improve. But if that improvement is consistently coming from a place of lack, and I am a terrible, terrible person, when chances are you're really not. You've just grown up in an environment that's taught you that you have to be absolutely bloody perfect. So then when you don't reach this arbitrary level of perfectionism, which is instilled within you, you feel like a failure. But because there's no such thing as perfect, that means you're always feeling like a failure, no matter how many promotions you get, no matter how little food you eat, no matter what you look like in the mirror. So first of all, it's about developing an awareness as to how you're actually feeling and acknowledging it. That's got to be step one.
No, that's what I love. All those, like how well you explain it. And this is shortly like let's say if I have someone who is struggling also the sustainable beast program, what I run a couple times in a year, it's the first thing is to become aware of these, like you said, these emotions, and I always put them out somewhere, like become like when you are thinking that, okay, now I'm stressed at the work, or I have to run to get kids from practice or from hobbies. So you don't have a lot of time and you get stressed, you end up eating food, or you are feeling sad, or you are feeling happy. And first of all, the first step is always to become aware of these feelings, and writing, like what I love to do is to somehow put them out, like those emotions, what you are feeling, and understanding that having all these emotions, it's totally normal. It's being a human, because it's not, if you are going to tell that I'm not going to be stressed in my life, it's not going to happen. You are going to feel stressed at some point. And when you write it down that, okay, I feel stressed, it's out of from your brain. And then it's then we start for strategies, how to move forward. First step is to become aware. And then, okay, now I'm stressed. Earlier, maybe I used food, a way to relieve that stress, to give my brain that dopamine to get out of, feel better, and get to not feel those emotions. But when you are aware and starting actually to say that, okay, I'm stressed, it's not good, it's not a bad thing, it's just an emotion. And then finding other ways than food. Like for someone, it's just waiting, let time pass, and accepting that feeling. Maybe for someone else, it's doing like, okay, I'm stressed, I go to call my friend, or do some other activity instead of food, and just finding something else to do, and winning time for yourself before that action, because it's so hard to get out of these habits what you have had maybe your whole life, and finding some other ways to handle with these emotions.
And I think as well, what I'll often say to people is on exactly the point you just mentioned, which is that it's okay to feel. you know, and we all get stress. If I happen to have had, I can confidently say, I don't brag very much, but I can confidently say I know myself pretty well. I've had to. It's how I overcame everything. So as self-aware as I am, sometimes the days will just throw things your way that you just did not see coming.
Yeah.
The world is by definition outside of your control. Other people, their words, what they think, they're outside of your control. And whether that be people in your team, if you're trying to build a business, whether it be clients, whether it be strangers on the internet who are saying trolley things in the comment sections, whatever the hell it might be, you can't control things. And if I haven't controlled myself, or maybe I just my finger was off the pulse for something, and then I didn't give myself enough breathing space in between, you know, certain meetings and whatever it might have been, and it gets to the end of the day and I just haven't managed myself well enough based on what's been thrown my way. First thing I'm going to say to Jess is put a movie on and we're getting a Domino's. That's the first thing I will say. Like, and you could argue well, that's me eating my emotions. And to some extent it is, but we're messy humans. Yeah. We are. We're not meant to be perfect. Like this idea of discipline is thrown around so much these days. And don't get me wrong, discipline is important.
Oh yeah.
But we are just human. It's okay to use food for whether it's for fun, whether it's to celebrate, or whether it's here and there at the end of the day to manage. I wouldn't say to manage your emotions, but just to give you a bit of a dopamine hit at the end of the day, because it's been a terrible day. The problem is when that's all you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the only way to cope with your emotions is food. So it's like for some people, it's some kind of pleasure, like obviously where you get dopamine. It's the same feeling if you have a workout, you go for nature, have a fresh air, go for, like what I love to do is hiking, going for a walk, having meaningful conversation with my wife. And this is for my mental health so important that I could not, but obviously everybody don't have that opportunity or possibility, or they have totally different ways to give that dopamine. These are just my ways. And it's really, the question is that what is your way? Because food, it's probably the worst way. It's okay sometimes, but if it's the only way to feel better, and that is also like something what I always like to look when I go to see, like I live in a very small village, and I'm most of the time I'm just home, not going too much out or big cities or restaurants, eating out or anything. So kind of boring life, but I enjoy it. I enjoy it. It's now, I would not imagine when I was younger to have that kind of life. I thought that this is so boring, but now it's something what I naturally enjoy. And when I go out and I see it, like that there is some restaurant, people are here in Italy, like we go every Sunday for hiking, and then having a good lunch, eating like all desserts, cakes, whatever we want. And then I just look around and people, like they have so much overweight. They drive in front of the restaurant, go there, eat. Like obviously they are not capable of doing it, and I'm just thinking I'm so grateful that I'm able to walk. I get my dopamine from somewhere else, and for those people, unfortunately, it's probably the only way to feel better, to get the dopamine is that's their thing. Like obviously we are all different, but I'm just looking and thinking always that I'm so happy that it's not easy to exercise, it's not easy to work out, but I'm so grateful to have that, or to be able to walk, to be able to do actually things and enjoy having kind of quality life, what I believe is a quality life, and not only using that food in a way to have that kind of feel of happiness, what we are in the end we are all chasing for.
And there's a really important point there, and I think it's a societal point, which is that I believe that the only reason really that the only reason as an alcoholic I sought rehab and AA is because there's really severe consequences to that, socially, for your family and health,
Yeah.
and it's similar with eating,
Yeah.
depending on the extent that it goes to.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. The second part is also the ramification of judgment. So society is very judgmental.
Yeah.
Towards any form of addiction, whether it be food addiction. So people who are obese, the world is very uncomfortable with people who are overweight. And I would argue, actually, the world, I believe, has actually a more sympathetic view to your alcoholics and your drug addicts than they are to food, So anyway, you've got these social consequences. And for me, that, for right or wrong, is the driving force to why people would come to me for help, for example. Whereas you have people, let's talk about it from the dopamine perspective that you just mentioned. People will go to the gym, or people will work their arse off at work. And not all the time, but what's actually happening there is those individuals are using the gym in exactly the same way that these other individuals are using food, or the other individuals are using alcohol. So on the surface, they're not being judged by society. In fact, society is praising these individuals. Whereas what's actually happening is these individuals, this so-called success that they are exuding, is actually driven through trauma. It's not this desire to have a good body. It's a desire to move away from the pain of not having a perfect body. So there's this obsession that then drives them, whether it be in work, whether it be in the gym, whatever it might be. So then people will say things like, well, gym is my therapy. And it's like, dude, like, therapy's therapy. The gym's good. It's what we could call a healthy coping mechanism, perhaps. But at some point, you've got to the gym's not open. You can't go to the gym 24/7, man. So I think I think everyone can benefit from therapy, because we've all got stuff. We believe that only people who overeat or only people who drink too much contain trauma. Everyone does. It's not. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a so-called fucked up person. Sorry if I can't swear. It doesn't. We've all got it, and maybe you found a quote unquote better way to manage it than other people, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It's just that society has accepted you so that you haven't hit a rock bottom yet that's driving you into actually getting help for it. Well, I do find in these people, then when we look from a wider spectrum and we look at whether it be divorce rates or if we look at happiness scales, for example, they're worse than they ever have been. When we have access to more than we ever have done, that's because I believe that we have all these dopamine opportunities around us, but we're not actually getting to the root cause of what's truly inside of all of us,
No, it's so well explained. This is you just put it so well. Wow, thank you. So it's all like, it's what is society thinking, that what is like for some people, let's say that most of the people think that for example, like you said, gym is a great way to do it, but there are so many people who are doing it way too much that it's not healthy anymore. Like a little bit of kind of everything is good, and it's what ultimately what matters is that you are in a good place, you are happy what you are actually doing, you feel good the way how things are, and you are accepting the way, because it's not your body is not determined if you have a lot of weight or not weight. It doesn't mean if you are healthy or not. It's not, it doesn't mean anything. Or obviously it gives some kind of like most of the people who have a lot of overweight, they are not healthy, but all overweight people, they might be still very healthy. but just having a little bit more weight and but still feeling really, really guilty about it. And so what is then how you are addressing, like if someone is eating, let's say that you struggle with stress eating, and it starts like that you are, what kind of strategies you are using to get rid of, like now, like we said, that first step is to become aware of those emotions, habits, but what kind of strategies you then recommend, or like obviously it's for every person probably the different strategy, but what kind of strategies you are using to get rid of eating emotions?
Yeah, as I said before, I think part one is helping people connect the dots, because then what you do is when somebody then reacts a certain way in the present moment, what they realize is that they're not reacting to the situation or the stress or the trigger that's right in front of them. They are reacting to what this stress, trigger, or situation is unconsciously taking them back to. So that's always going to be part one, because then it helps them then, takes a bit of weight off the shoulders. It takes the shame off the shoulders somewhat. Then when it comes to being practical about it, it completely depends on the situation. One tool that we love is the feelings wheel. So what's really interesting is that when you look at feelings in detail, anyone can Google it right now. Just Google feelings wheel. I've got it here on my screen, actually. I always refer to it. So what can happen is people will often say that I feel angry, or I feel sad, or I feel happy. And then when you go into the feelings wheel, there are subsectors of that. So for example, if you're feeling angry, are you actually feeling maybe let down, humiliated, bitter, mad, aggressive, frustrated? And then within each of those, there are further subsets as to what you're actually feeling. So you initially thought that you were feeling angry. Well, maybe now you've been able to identify and articulate that maybe it's not anger. Underneath that, you're actually feeling let down. So once you've identified then that you're feeling let down, you can then identify, well, am I betrayed or am I resentful, for example? So getting in tune, helping people just write out and explicitly see what it is they're actually feeling, as opposed to the very quote unquote basic level as to how they've been feeling, that goes a very long way. I'm also a huge fan of journaling. So we've got journaling, we've got breathing exercises, we've got walking, we've got nature. It depends on the circumstance. What I would try at a broad level to help your listeners understand is to distinguish between when it's best to get into your mind and when it's best to get into your body. Because the mistake that I made when I first started all of this self-development stuff was, I'm a very analytical human. I love trying to make sense of things. It's what made me so cynical back in the day, you know? Whereas, so when I started all of this stuff, I loved journaling because it just meant I could analyze the hell out of situations. So when I was going into work, when I was in the corporate world, I had my little orange notepad. And after every meeting, sometimes in meetings, after every experience I would learn something new about myself, which is great because that means I was developing awareness. So I'm not saying it's a bad practice at all. Journaling is probably overall has been my most favorite tool. But what in hindsight I learned I was actually doing was I was becoming very, very good at having awareness. And I was becoming very, very good at articulating how I felt. I could articulate how I was feeling back to a psychologist better than they could to myself. However, that didn't help me learn how to feel what I was feeling. It just meant I was becoming aware of it. So what we have to appreciate is that if our trauma defines that we shouldn't be allowed to feel our feelings because the trauma is so deep and it carries so much shame, our mind avoids that type of feeling. We're not allowed to access it. It takes some practice to learn how to feel those things. So it took me a long time to realize that you can use your mind to journal, to analyze, to try to understand situations. But I would say that that's to be used in times of reflection, when you're calm, when you're not in and amongst all of the hustle and bustle. The first thing that people need to do is to get into their body, because your body is what we're ignoring. Our body is giving us back all of these signals all the time. You know, we get butterflies in our tummy, we start sweating, our heart starts racing. So physiologically, our body is telling us that it feels that there's a threat somewhere. When you could literally be sitting in a room of people, just other people, normal people, not murderers, just people, but your nervous system can't take it. That's a signal. Your body is physiologically telling you that even though everything is safe, your interpretation, your body's interpretation is that it is not. That means you've been taught that it is not. So now that you're aware that you have been taught that this isn't safe, well, we can understand where we were taught that lesson, but then also we can get into the body, such as through the breath, you know, such as listening to what our body's actually doing. And then we can use later space to get into the mind. So I would say that the best thing to do is identify when it's best to get into your body, and when it's best to get into your mind, isolate the two. And then there's loads of tools within each of those that you can use.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. That was such a great example. And this is what you said about our bodies. Like if it's a skill, learning to, like, first of all, to all those emotions, but also because your body is very good at telling you if there is something like about not only about stress eating, but everything, like you know, you might have you feel back pain, you feel you have some kind of your knees hurting, you have headache, so it's a symptom for something. But it's that your body is trying to tell you that now do something, like, for example, but because that's the hardest part. Like I was just I happened to be in it's totally different thing, but just came to my mind what I thought to share. We were walking with my wife and saw one of my client who was struggling, that she have so much back pain, and then she have been all kind of doctors and said everything, like, she thought that she's probably lifted something heavy and now it's hurting in the back. And I said that actually by far, like, most common reason for lower back pain, it's that you have the symptom it's starting from your hips. It's maybe lack of mobility, maybe lack of strength, and for most cases it's lack of mobility. And then so some exercises, like, because now you know you have a symptom, but then how to actually deal with that symptom. There could be your body is telling that there is something wrong, like with those, or it don't have to be wrong, but there is some symptom, like you said about those emotions. But then how to actually, it's really hard to put those dots together, that okay, having, for example, back pain, the issue is most likely not in your back, but it's somewhere else. Or if you have a headache, there could be so many reasons. That it could be that it's just you need to drink more water, or it's that you have been in the sun for a longer period of time. There could be so many reasons, but it's not that there is some tumor in your head, but it's just the way how we are thinking and how we are connecting these dots. It kind of relates everything what our body is trying to tell us. But it's really, really hard skill to learn, to actually listen your body and recognize those, like you said, emotions or some that where those problems are actually coming from.
Yeah, I think I love taking more of a very clinical, borderline black and white perspectives to things, because, you know, as soon as we talk about feelings, people have this idea that feelings sit in this ether, you know, as though they're completely untouchable. They are difficult to quantify and understand. That's what I believe I'm very good at, because I spend so much time with them. So yes, feelings are difficult to quantify. They're difficult to develop awareness to, but it's not impossible.
No.
And I think what makes it much more accessible for the average person is by understanding that we're just a creature of evolution. We're not this magical being that has these magical feelings that come out of thin air. everything that we are experiencing is being experienced for a very valid reason, which will come from our past somewhere. Everything that we feel has been learned. So once we realize that if our body is starting to react, it's because it perceives this thing as a threat. It means that it's been taught that it's a threat, as opposed to us, because what we'll often do is we'll go into this victimhood mode, which is, it's because I'm weak, or because I'm lazy, or because I'm rubbish, or because I get scared very easily. These are just really, really simple explanations, overly simplistic explanations. If you feel something, there is an explanation for it. We just have to find out what it is. There's going to be, if you're, let's say if you well, a really good example, public speaking. Lots of people are fearful of public speaking, but I would struggle to find anyone that if they got on stage every single day for the rest of their lives, they would feel just as nervous by the end of it as they would the first time they stepped on stage. Why? Because they've exposed themselves to the fear. Once you've exposed yourself to the fear, your body, your nervous system, your eyes see the thing. This is terrifying. I'm not used to it. So your nervous system responds accordingly. Threat. But then you do it again, and then again, and again. And then all of a sudden, your brain's then able to say, well, you know what? This thing wasn't so damaging last time. Maybe it is safe after all. So your body then responds accordingly. And you do it more. This is what we mean when we say step into your fear. Practically, logically, your nervous system is learning that actually this thing is relatively safe. So feelings can be approached in a very, very logical manner. And once you expose yourself to the fear in a very informed fashion, well, it's actually not so scary after all, you know?
No, it's so well said again. So this all kind of feelings, like what I call like limiting beliefs, what you have, who knows where they are coming from. Like you think that, you know, I'm a person who always starting and then ending up quitting after a month or two for whatever you are starting. And it's like, as soon as it's getting harder. Like, let's say I use an example for eating healthier, or it could be working out. For example, for working out, those are like what I have kind of conversation. It could be for food, but let's say workouts, like if you are working out and then, you know, something happens in your life that you have a busier period of inner work or something, and then first reaction, what you are going to do, that now I'm busy, I can't work out anymore. I don't have time to work out. And that is the first reaction. It's same with the food, like that, you know, I always end up overeating at weekend, and then, you know, you go off track for a short period of time, and then, you know, you are thinking that now I gained a little bit scale weight, that I won't, you are not getting back on track. And those kind of things like workouts, it's like that you kind of try to, or with the food, it's kind of the same philosophy behind, is that you think you are trying to tell to yourself that story, that this is how it is, and when it's getting hard, you just quit, or you don't keep learning and building those habits what in the first place are going to solve all those problems. And this is like, for example, emotional eating, because as that is our topic now, is that I just had a conversation with one of my clients. It was 2 days ago, so it's good in my mind still. She said she was in vacation, and then, like, what I loved, she said that when she came now back, obviously she had a good time, enjoyed the vacation, was eating a lot of foods, and came back, gained a lot of scale weight, like 5-6 pounds, which is a lot of weight for her. And she was like that. She said that now she have changed, that now she's thinking like that, okay, earlier how she would respond would be to restrict everything and to punish kind of herself, that she was having a good time in vacation. And now she said that, okay, now she's just getting back on track. She's here to fix relationship with food, and it's that, to understanding that these things are normal in life. It's okay to enjoy. And what actually makes the difference is that how fast you are getting back on track and your normal life without feeling that guilt, shame, and because then you are still, this is a totally different. If your approach is that you need to lose weight as soon as possible, and when you are learning these things, that this is not actually what I'm trying to do, that I'm building healthier relationship with food, trying to fix my yo-yo dieting, because this is the cycle what would trigger her to go get off track and keep going back to old habits. And now I said that this is the thing what probably be like, she still, obviously the goal is still to lose weight, but I said that now it's time for you to actually, as she have been very consistent doing things consistently, not progress is not there, and basically you have two options. I would, obviously, what is that? The obvious one is that you eat less, move more to create bigger deficit and try to lose weight that way. But that is after being months in a phase of, and especially in a mindset of trying to lose weight, is that it's to get out of this. It's going to be the scariest thing you have probably ever done, but it's going in opposite direction and actually starting to eat, learning to maintain your weight with a purpose while eating as much as possible. So instead of that old kind of mindset is to eat less, move more, and when you understand that this is not, life is not only about fat loss journey, there are phases where you should actually, with the purpose, learn to maintain your weight, and it's helping so much with your relationship with food, and that you don't have these kind of cycles, or that in your mind you are dieting. Like, I know that you have worked like me with many people who have been in that dieting mindset for years, even for decades, and never really learning the skill, and having always that fear of gaining weight, and never having that, like that this is something totally new. What is the scariest thing? That now I'm actually, even ultimate goal is still to lose weight, that you are for short period of time learning how to actually maintain weight and eating more and see what it happens to your body. And these are kind of realizations. It's kind of doing those, what you said, kind of the scariest thing. What is the biggest fear of you is to actually to do it. And then when you do it more often, you learn, your body and nervous system becomes more familiar with it, like everything in life. But often it's that what brings you the best results is that what is the most scariest thing, what you haven't done so much, and you should probably be doing a little bit more.
I don't think I know. Psychologically speaking, all any of us need is love, safety, approval, comfort, validation. You get those ingredients. They're not always healthy, those ingredients, by the way. You shouldn't necessarily require external validation, but as a human, that's what you need. And it's what you desire anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
So, well, that comes in, if you've been raised in an environment and a culture and society that tells you that the only way that you're going to be loved is to be skinny, and you've never had that, and you've worked and worked and worked and worked practically at getting that approval because you've lost weight. Well, what then happens is the process of losing weight is your new safety. It's your new comfort, because you've finally gotten the approval and validation that you've sought since you were a child. So the very idea to that human of letting go of that safety, when it's all you've been searching for your entire life, it's terrifying.
Oh yeah.
It's terrifying. And that's why it is. It's not because they're skinnier, it's because they're accepted finally. Nobody's actually after skinniness. They're just after the skinniness that the happiness and the validation, the comfort they think that thing's going to bring them. It's all about the feeling in the end. So it's a delicate process. You've hit the nail on the head. Lots of people, as difficult as weight loss can be for people, even once they master that, what can be even more difficult is the next part, which is what I would call creating a new identity. Because at the end of the day, if you've always used food as a way to, if you've always used food as a way to comfort, let's say, I'll use myself as an example with alcohol. Just think about this for a second. I didn't go to rehab, even though everyone was pushing me to it. The only reason I'm really here, at least in the health that I'm in, is because of the people around me. That's really the only reason. I should have gone to rehab and I didn't. But why didn't I? Because you have, from a logical perspective, this thing that's going to save your life. Undeniably, this thing here is going to save your life. But I still couldn't go. So what's happening there? I couldn't go because the emotional side of my mind, which we call the 95% brain, because it dictates 95% of your daily brain activity. Well, it's 95%. That's always going to overpower the conscious mind, the 5% mind, which is responsible for motivation and strength. That's why motivation is so fleeting, because it actually is. So if in my emotional mind, if in my 95% mind, it's full of fear, trauma, and the only thing that saved you in terms of kept you safe is alcohol, this emotional mind is going to fight you tooth and nail to ensure that you keep that alcohol in your life, because it's the only thing that, from your perception, actually comforts you. No people do, no partner does, nothing does. The only thing that comforts me is this thing, which is actually destroying your life at the same time. And it's a similar thing with food. It's that we can have this thing that logically is not serving this person anymore, but it's been their only comfort. It's been the only thing that has actually calmed them. It's the only thing that hasn't answered back. It's the only thing that's truly, truly been there when everybody else in life is just a source of stress. So this is where sabotage comes into the question. You know, people are asking, like, why do I sabotage all the time? That's why. It's not because you're weak, lazy, or stupid. You used the term before, rightly. You said that people have this idea that they're lazy when they're not. It's nothing to do with laziness, like it is, but there's always something underneath the so-called laziness. And that is a version of themselves that has gotten them up until this point. Once again, from a clinical perspective, whether this version of themselves is healthy or not, it's helped them survive up until this point. So as far as the brain is concerned, the way we've done things has worked. We're not meant to be happy. It's not what the brain is for. We're here to survive. That's it. Our brain doesn't care about all of this thriving nonsense and self-growth. Hates it. It's challenging. It wants to be comfortable. So if this thing has comforted you your entire life, you're as soon as you introduce any challenge to that, you're probably going to sabotage here and there. But if you understand why, you know, at least you can be a bit kinder to yourself and have a bit of compassion for yourself about it, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I loved it. So I think we could keep going for another hour, as I really, really enjoyed this conversation with you. But as I try to keep this, I think we are now well over an hour. And next, I know you are busy. I have also some things to do. So just to wrap up this thing, where do people can find you? How to connect with you? How to work with you? So what is the best way to find you?
Instagram. It was TikTok, but as we were discussing before this, it's quite a difficult world at the moment, TikTok, for people who've been there for a while. So I'm still on TikTok very much, but you won't engage with me on TikTok. You'll engage with me on Instagram because that's where I live. And I think people have this impression that the likes of you and I don't respond to messages. Maybe you don't, I'm not sure. I'm sure you do. But I certainly do. Because it's where I live. I've got nothing else to do, you know? So if anybody listens to this and they want to message because what I've said has resonated, for God's sake, just ask. Like, I don't leave any messages untouched. If you want the help, if you want support, if you just want to ask a question, just if you go over to my Instagram today, you'll have a response within a couple of days. So I would, because I actually care as well. So I push people to do that. The reason I do what I do is because I know what it feels like to be at rock bottom. It's what drives me. It's what makes me so emotional about it. So if somebody just wants to have a conversation, message me on Instagram.
Yeah, and it's a Bobbynutrition, right, in Instagram.
Yes. Yeah,
awesome. No, this is how I love to have this discussion. Only people who I don't respond are like, there are so many marketers who are trying to sell their new sales copy or new, but for normal people, if you have questions, I'm sure you answered them also. Yes. But if you have some newest sales copy to sell, I don't know if you respond all of them. But that's the type of like that I try to ignore, like promoting some stuff or doing like those are, I don't know about you, I get daily so many of those, but for normal help, reaching out, having conversation, that's what I think we both love to do, and we are here to help, and if it's our coaching, what could be helpful, let it be that, but there is no need for selling or doing something. It's just to have a conversation and generously just trying to help.
Of course.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Rob, for your time and this valuable. I really enjoyed it, and please stay in touch and talk to you soon.
Thanks, bro.